This video is the content for page 16 in your workbook, 1.3 Order of Operations. So we can use the word PEDMAS sometimes to help us remember the order of operations for math. Sometimes you maybe heard it as, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. I just want to clarify a couple of things here because parentheses are also called grouping symbols, is how we reference them a lot in higher math. So grouping symbols would be things like parentheses, but also brackets, like you see here, braces. They're like the squiggle lines. Here's your traditional parentheses. We work inside to outside typically, or sometimes you distribute. The other grouping symbol you might see, I'm going to add here, is like if you have a numerator and a denominator, usually you don't see the parentheses, but whatever's in here, whatever expressions are inside the numerator or denominator, those are done separately. Also, absolute value symbols would be considered grouping symbols. And there might be some other things that come up. Exponents, you would also want to think of roots or radicals. Multiplication and division could be division and multiplication. It works left to right. On all of these, it's left to right. Same for addition, subtraction. Grouping symbols is usually in to out or distribute. Okay, so just jot down yourself some notes. If you don't have the workbook and you're writing in a notebook, that's fine. Just make sure you jot down anything you need there. Now we're going to work through a couple examples here. I'll leave a couple for you to do also, and then you can come back. So just pause the video. I'll do A and C, and then you could do B and D for classwork, virtual classwork. Remember, this first chapter, you don't need to submit your notes, but normally after that, from chapter 2 on, you will always need to submit for credit. So we have 5 minus 3 times quantity, 2 plus 4 squared, and quantity. So we would want to work inside the parentheses and follow order of operations within that. So we have 2 plus 4 squared would be 16. We're going to do that first. Then we have 2 plus 16 inside the parentheses. Always please do carry everything down. Don't just so go line by line by line. Don't just go across ways like that, or do little pieces of it and kind of do it sketchy, especially if you're turning it in for a quiz or test for grading. You want to have it looking very orderly. So I'd rewrite the 3, and then 2 plus 16 is 18. Then I would go ahead and calculate out the multiplication here. So if there's just one thing inside the parentheses, that means multiply. It's not really acting as a grouping symbol. It's acting as a multiplication notification. So here's 5 minus 3 times 18 comes out to be 54. You can try these without your calculator, but if they're larger numbers and you get stuck, that's okay. And then lastly, we go ahead and do that subtraction and get negative 49. And that would be our complete answer. It's a good idea to mark your answer clearly. So try pausing the video and doing B on your own. I'll go back to it after though if you want to check it out and have some guidance there. For letter C, we have 4 plus 2 in parentheses minus brackets, 5 squared divided by parentheses 2 plus 3 parentheses and brackets. So the brackets act the same as parentheses. It's just to clarify like which ones are the outside ones. So The 4 plus 2, we could just go ahead and do that. 6 minus, then inside these brackets, we're going to want to do the parentheses first. So we leave our 5 squared divided by the 2 plus 3 is going to be 5. And then end brackets. Then we just carry everything down. So that expression equals this expression, 6 minus 5 squared divided by 5, equals this new expression, 6 minus parentheses or brackets 5 squared, which would be 25 divided by 5. Now some things you can streamline and kind of do in your head a little bit, so don't worry too much. So then we have 6 minus 25 divided by 5 is 5. And then lastly, we would have 6 minus 5 is 1. And then again, mark your answer clearly. So let's go back to B and we'll work through that one. The parentheses over here, 4 minus 7, I can do that first. So I have 30 divided by 5 times 2. I'm just going to copy everything else down. Plus 4 minus 7 would be negative 3. Make sure you do put your parentheses in there for that. And then that would be squared. Because there's a big difference between having minus 3 or negative 3 all squared, which would be positive 9, versus negative 3 squared with the negative outside of the base. That would be negative 9. So these are not equivalent things to say. Okay, so we want to be careful with that. So 30 divided by 5 times 2 plus positive 9 would go in the next line. Now here's another one that you have to be really careful with. This parenthesis not meaning do it first, like up here. It's not the same. It's not a grouping symbol. It's just a multiplication notation. So within the hierarchy of divide and multiply, we want to work left to right. So we're going to do 30 divided by 5 first, and we'll get 6. Then we're going to multiply by 2, and then add the 9. So we would have 6 times 2 in the next line, which would be 12 plus 9. Finally, we get 21. So this is a really common mistake that people just want to do this first because there's a parenthesis there, or they think multiply always comes before divide because the way it reads in the little an acronym, but that's not the case, and you can see where you would get an entirely different answer if you did that. That's why mathematicians had clearly defined an order of operations that works all the time. Okay, next one here is letter D, and we have some braces involved on that. So we have 7. We're just going to carry things down and work them as we go. Times 2 squared plus 2, and then we have another set of parentheses. 20 divided by 4 plus 6 is our innermost parentheses, so we're going to do that, calculate that out, because we want to work in to out. So we start here with this 4 plus 6, then we're going to work these parentheses, and then finally the brace, what's left in the braces. So now we have equals 7 times parentheses, or it's actually a brace, 2 squared plus 2 times 20 divided by 10 would be 2. And then put your brace there as well. Okay, to finish it up, we have 7 times the brace, and then we would have exponents. For 2 squared is 4, plus 2 times 2 is 4, and our brace, and then we have 7 times 8. At any point when you're sick of making the like braces or whatever, you can turn them back into parentheses. That's fine. 7 times 8 would be 56, and that's our final answer for that one. Okay, so here's where grouping symbols will be notated by the fraction bar. So it's page 17 of your workbook, example 1.14, letter A. So we have in the fractions, we're going to do the entire numerator first. Negative 4 squared minus parentheses 4 plus 23. All divided by 5 plus 3 times quantity 5 minus 4. So I'm just going to rewrite with an equals and write the fraction bar and do the stuff in the top. So negative 4 squared, I'm just going to leave alone for now. Bring it down. Minus, and then I'll do what's in the parentheses. 4 plus 23 is 27. So I don't have to have the parentheses there anymore. I can just write the number. And in the bottom, now I can start working that one. 5 plus 3 times 5 minus 1. 5 minus 4 is going to give me 1. That one I do want to write the parentheses. Next line down, I have exponents to deal with. So this is my exponential, the 4 squared. So the base is 4. The negative is on the outside. So just leave that there for now. So we're going to have negative 4 squared, which is 16. And then minus 27. So that is this is a big mistake I see, that people would make that positive right there, but we don't want to do that because we're just looking at this part first. There's no parentheses including that negative. Some construction going on here if you hear banging. So then we have the 5 plus the 3 times 1, so it's just 5 plus 3. Again, you can streamline some of this. I'm just writing everything out so you can follow along. Negative 16 minus 27 is going to be minus 43, all divided by 8. And that is a fine answer, although we want to center our negative. Negative 43 over 8. Negative would attach with the top or the bottom or be right in the middle. We could write it as a mixed number by dividing the 8 into the 43 and then having our remainder. So I'm just going to write or negative 5 3/8. You do not need to do that. Remember, making something a mixed number is not simplifying. Making sure it has no common factors to the numerator or denominator is simplifying or reducing. So go ahead and try letter B and then come back and look. I'm not going to record everything in motion. I'm just going to write the answers out. I think this one's pretty straightforward. So in this one, just go ahead and do what's inside the parentheses, make your calculations. And we end up down here at negative 63 over 1. And you do want to simplify it to be negative 63 unless for some reason you're told not to. So when you're using the MyOpenMath electronic homework system, it will mark you wrong usually for having a 1 in the denominator. Okay, we just have a couple left for this section, 1.3, and then I'll make a new video for 1.4. Grouping symbols can also be absolute value symbols. They're just straight lines. That means we want to take the distance from 0. We don't say positive because it could come out to be 0, and 0 doesn't hold a sign. But basically, it's your non-negative numbers. So we would start with just the innermost parentheses, carry the rest down for now. Negative 3, absolute value, 2 to the 4th minus 9 in parentheses, 9 squared. That's important because we want to make sure we get that sign right. Then we are going to go ahead and calculate our exponents. So we have negative 3 absolute value 16 minus 81. And absolute value equals -3, absolute value of -65. And the absolute value of -65 is +65. Now here's where it's a little tricky. Sometimes people aren't sure what to do. But this operation with the 3 next to it, that actually means times. You could put a little dot there, or you could put parentheses around, but -3 times, actually it'll be +65. So you could write it with parentheses, or you could write it like this, -3 times 65 with a dot. We usually don't use the X symbol for multiplication at this point, because as we move into algebra, that gets confusing. Other than scientific notation, we use it for. So that would equal -195 as our final answer there. So now go ahead and pause the video, and you can do part B as a virtual classwork there, and then check back, and I'll write up the full solution for you. So there's quite a few steps with this one. You can streamline it. You might start to notice, well, if I do, for example here, if I did this 3 squared as 9 somewhere along the way earlier, it doesn't affect it. It's fine. One thing I do want to point out is here when in this 4th line down, 2 minus 4 absolute value times with the -2 in there, so it's -4 times the absolute value of -2, and so I wrote it just as -4 times 2 in parentheses, and that is my -8. I switched here from subtract to write as add the opposite, just so I could work with it, and it was a little easier to deal with and kind of juggle. So I hope that helps you to get back in the swing of things. If it's been a while for you to do these ones, they have some common things that are can be challenging. So if you say, oh, I forgot about that, or I never knew that, these were chosen so that you can see the differences and guard against those common mistakes. So have a great day. That's it for 1.3. I'll make a new one for 1.4.